Welcome back, guys. We are today going to be touching on interacting with the API and getting Python all set up to actually start or to be able to interact with the API. So I provided you guys with the text document with all of my notes. That's what we're going to be hitting on, or that's what we're going to be walking through today. So first things first is at this point, I do expect you to have Python already installed. So that was one of the requirements that I listed before this. But as we move along here, the first thing we want to do with our resilient instance is we want to actually build out a virtual environment. And the reason that I use virtual environments is actually the same reason that many people use virtual environments, which is if I'm going to be building an app, I don't want to have one app have one version of a Python module installed and have another app with a different version of that same Python module installed. And when you do that, it can cause problems where maybe one version of the module supported a certain line of code and the next version didn't. So the reason that we want to use Python virtual environments is because then what you can do is you can actually run your own instance of Python within its own virtual environment with its own modules installed, and that will not affect anything else that's running on your system, whether it's in a different virtual environment or if it's in your own Python, your basic Python environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a pip install virtual env. That is the command that we're going to run to actually install virtual environments. I already have virtual environment installed, so I'm just going to go ahead and back it out here. But you would want to run that command. And then typically what I do at this point is I actually make a directory or go to my directory, one or the other, where I'm going to be actually installing my Python environments. So what we're going to do here is I already have this made, but one of the places I normally start is in Windows. I could just do mkdir, and in the C directory, I will create a .python envs. Oops, not E. There we go. So we'll do this, create this directory. Now, as I said, I already actually have this directory installed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a CD into that. But after you create that directory, you'll want to CD into this as well. So from here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to create the virtual environments. And now, like I was saying about virtual environments, one of the best benefits of the virtual environments is actually the same reason why we moved to AppHosts, right? So I said you could have your own, each Python environment wouldn't interfere with the other Python environments. That's the same way that the AppHosts work, where each app is running its own container. So if one goes down, it doesn't interfere with another one. So I explained that the environments, or what the environments was for, and we created our environments folder, and we also installed our Python, or we installed Python's module for virtual environments. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to build out the first environment. So for instance, this one we will do virtual env Python. So first we're going to run virtual environment, and we're going to go ahead and define the version of Python that we want running in here. So I'm going to define that as Python 3. And then we just have to describe basically where we want to put this. So at this point, since we are already in the Python environments folder, we're just going to go ahead and give it a name so that it puts the environments into the folder of whatever name we provided. So for this one, we're going to go ahead and call this call this app builder demo. How about that? And we just wait a second here, and it should, there you go, create that environment. So now you can actually do a dir here, and you can see that I have here it is, app builder demo folder. So then we're just going to go ahead and we will dive down into that folder. So cd app builder demo. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to actually activate this environment. So at this point, we've created the environment, but we don't actually have it activated. So we're currently still running with our default Python environment. So the way we would activate that is actually by going into the scripts folder, and then we're going to go to activate. Now, there are a couple of different activate scripts in here, which I'll show you. So there is, oops, okay, doesn't work the same as ls. We'll just do that. Okay, so as you can see, there is quite a few different versions here of activates, depending on what you're running this in, whether you're running it in PowerShell, you're running it in command line, you're running it in the bash, I think is in there. There's just several versions that you can run this in here. So what I'm actually going to do is if we just run the activate command itself, this command here, this will actually just pick the version that you're running in. It'll verify what you're running in and then run the proper one. So if we do that, now we can see off to the right there that we are running in the app builder virtual environment. Oops, CLS. So we're back here, and now we've got the virtual environment built out. We've got the virtual environment activated. And so at this point, we are done with the virtual environment setup side of it. However, we have to actually install the apps or the modules for Python that we want to be running. So for this instance, we're going to be installing a couple different modules. The problem is that one of the modules, and this is only for Windows, one of the modules actually requires you to enable long paths in Windows. So the way that we actually go about getting this set up is we're going to go to run, and then we're going to type in gpedit.msc, and that'll allow us to edit the group policy. So bring us into our group policy here. And so where we're going to go, open this up so a little easier to see. So where we're going to go is we're going to go into local computer policy. We're going to go into computer configuration. We're then going to go into administrative templates. We're going to go into system, and then file system. And yep, it's just here. So if we just go into file system here, you'll see that there's another folder down, NTFS. You don't have to go any further down than file system. You're just going to drop in right here. Now right here is this setting for enable Win32 long paths. As you can see, I already have mine enabled. If you already have yours enabled, that's perfect. That's all you need. If you don't have it enabled, you'll just go ahead and double click on this and then set it to enabled and then hit OK. That'll allow you to enable long paths, which is required to install the Python module Resilient SDK. So if you are having problems with installing Resilient SDK, that is where I would start and make sure that you didn't miss that step at all. So from there, now we've got the long paths enabled, so we can go ahead and start installing the Python modules for Resilience. So typically this can all be done in one command. So I will just do a pip install resilience, and then space, we'll do resilience circuits, and then the last one is resilience SDK. We'll hit enter. All right, so now we've got all of those installed and we are good to go. Which actually we can do a pip list. This will actually show us what we have installed in this environment. So at this point, we've installed all the modules that we need to interact with Resilient itself. Of course, if you want to install your own modules for interacting with other tools and stuff like that for building out an integration, of course, you could do that now, and then it'll install it directly into this environment here. as, as long as you've got the actual environments listed here or running. So from there, we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive into the setting up resilience for authorization. Now, the first step in this is actually going to be to go create a key for it. So what we'll do here is move this over here. So we'll log in here. And then what we're going to do is we are going to go over to, oops, can't see it all. Go over to administrator settings. We're going to go into the users tab here, and then we're going to go into the API keys tab down below. I have already built one out, but essentially what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit create API key, define your permissions over here. Since I'm just going to be using this as a generic app builder one, I just provided it with all permissions, and then provide it with a name. Once you do that, just do this real quick. You'll scroll to the bottom and you'll hit create. And that'll actually create your API key here. So this is your API key. You've got your key ID and then you've got your key secret. There you go, key ID and then your key secret. And then you're going to want to save those because after you click OK here, you won't be able to see them again. You'll have to renew them, and then that means anything that was using these credentials will have to be reset. So we'll hit OK there. Since I already have mine, I'll just go ahead and delete this new one that I just created. Oops. All right, so I've got my integration set up here. And at this point, we can just go ahead and close resilience because we are all set there. All right, so from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start actually building out the authorization here. Now, the first thing that I always do is if I'm doing this in a virtual environment, I may have this virtual environment running on a different server than the other or than another one. Or for instance, if you've got different orgs, you may want one of your virtual environments connected to a test org, while your other one is connected to a prod org, right? So what I do from here is to make this easier on myself. First, I go into my PC settings. I go into my virtual environment here. And then I dive into the virtual environment I had listed here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the Python packages. So we're going to go into lib, site packages, and then we're going to look for, I believe it is resilient circuits, correct. Okay. So we're going to come down here till we find resilient circuits, and we're going to open up resilient circuits. And in here, you'll find an app.py. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and right click that, and we're going to do edit with Notepad++. And I'll bring this over here. And so essentially at this point, what we're going to be doing is down here at the just below where it imports everything, we're actually going to be defining the right here, defining the environment. So I'll grab all of this. So we'll copy that. And then we're going to go over here to app, and we're going to go ahead and paste that in. Now, once you've got this pasted in, which we're just adding the app config file, and we're defining where that app config file is at. So right now, I've just got this placeholder for name of environment. So what we're going to do is here, we're going to go ahead and erase that. Maybe, there we go. And then we're going to add in app builder demo, whatever you've named yours, that's what you can go ahead and name it here. And then we're going to save it. And when you do this, make sure you don't grab the extra close parentheses there, and make sure you end it with this double quote there. But then go ahead and save that. And what we can do now, oops, come on, snap for me. All right. At this point, we're done in the resilient circuits folder. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and close this. And we'll be back in command prompt here. So at this point, what we will do is we will run resilient circuits, and then we're going to establish the config file. So we're going to do config, and then since this is the first time running config, we'll do a C for create. There is another one, -U for updates. That's typically used on a resilient integration server. And that's done to update the circuits file whenever you, or the app config file whenever you're adding a new integration to the integration server. That would be really the only time that I can see doing that. But the create file, we're still going to need that config file here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit enter, and it's going to create that config file. Now, oops, guess I shouldn't have closed this up just yet. In here is where we defined to build that app config file. So normally this would actually be installed in a .resilient file underneath the user who is installing this. So if you go to users, C : users, and then whatever user is you are, and then .resilient, that's where you're going to find this. But because we went in there and we defined the environment, we're actually defining to actually install that in here, and then actually look for that app config here while running within this virtual environment. So what we can do from here is we will open up this config file with Notepad++ again. All right, my own instance up. So in here, this is the config file that we're going to be editing. And in here, we would actually want to define resilient. We just need the server name. We don't need the other information that we have here. Or we don't need like the HTTPS, that kind of stuff. Just define the server name. So in my instance, it's going to be 192.168.101. I think I did 110. I'll have to look real quick. Yep. Okay. So mine is 110. Port 443 is good. That's where it's going to connect for the HTTPS connection. And then down here is where we've got our authorization, how we're going to actually authorize the application. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the API keys. So for this instance, for my demo environment here, I have that key ID. And for simplicity's sake, just going to paste the API secret string directly in here. So this provides the credentials of how we're going to authenticate using the API key. From here, the last thing that we need to do to guarantee correct authorization is define the org. So in my environments, let's look that up. I think it was just IBM, but and then essentially we've got this step completed. Now, the additional steps that I always like to take is come down here to the log directory. And for Linux, this log directory would be fine. But for me, since I'm building this on Windows, I'm going to go ahead and install it in. There we go. All right. So we'll just define the log directory as that C file, or that directory that we're building this virtual environment in. So we'll establish that. And then the log file name can stay the same, and then log level, we'll keep that as info for now, but if you guys want to add additional logging or anything like that, you can add debug or whatever level of logging you want to add here. So at this point, the last thing we also need to touch on here is the CA file. For my demo instance, I'm just going to do a CA file equals false. That'll allow us to connect without it trying to verify the cert, the SSL cert. But if you guys want to use that, you guys would just need to have a copy of that cert, and then actually just define where that cert location would be. But for this demo purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and put CA file equals false here. After that, we can go ahead and hit save. Save that file out. And then to test, to verify that everything is running properly, what we can do is we can do resilient circuits run, and fingers crossed, we don't have any problems. And it looks like we don't have any problems. Sweet. So we did successfully get that set up. So at this point, we are good to go from this side, where we've established our integration. Or we not our integration, I apologize. We've established our authorization into the system. So we'll go ahead and kill this for now. And I can close this.
So I do have a couple questions for you.
Yep, go for it.
So I guess the first question I want to ask is, when you switch the log file directory, would you end up changing that back when it comes to actually building for the app hosts? I guess that might be an app building question, but
yeah, so I will cover that in the app building section. But yes, you will have to set it specifically for the app host, because the app host is the app host is defined a little differently when it comes to the container and where it stores its logs. So I will touch on that, but yeah, the storage location is 100% based on where this is actually running. So for this instance, it's running on a Windows machine, so I'm going to want to run that in the drop those files into that virtual environment that I'm using. If you're building an integration on Linux, you can drop that into the temp file if that's where you want to store it. I know when you're using an integration server, typically that's stored in the temp file, but then of course some people move that around as well. So that's all dependent on how you're running that, and when we're dealing with the containers later and building them out, I will touch on that. So
okay, yeah, I just have to. Some of my questions I think are more geared to that, so I'll hold off on those questions until that section.
okay,
but
sounds
I
good.
do have. Let's see. In terms of like the configuration, like the app configuration that we saw, it seems like it's a lot more verbose than what typically we would see in terms of like the apps that we install into SOAR. So does that mean that people, they when they're building their apps, essentially they clearing it out?
So the answer to that is kind of a yes and no question. So when we look at this file, the verboseness of this is only because this is really meant to be more run with a the entire file is more meant to be run with an integration server, right?
Okay.
So let me. All right, so here we go. So in resilience, in one of the apps, what you're going to see is you're going to see this resilience section, and you may not see the notes, which anything that's got a hashtag in front of it, or a pound sign, whatever you want to refer to that as, that is going to be a comment in Python. So I don't know if we have any of the comments listed in the documentation, but essentially you could remove these without any problem. You can also come down, and I don't think that our integration does anything with the email stuff. So if you're deploying an app it pretty much always is going to use an API. So you typically don't have the email password option in there. So they don't even put that in the container files. So you will still have the org, and then a lot of this stuff is not needed because it's part of the integration itself. Um, and the CP4S stuff, I'm not entirely sure if this changes when you're installing it for a CP4S instance. Um, but I think that that might be handled when actually establishing the configuration from AppHost to CP4S instead. Um,
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure on that one because I haven't actually done an integration connection with CP4S myself.
Okay.
So yeah, so I don't think that I think that when it creates it, and it's been a little while since I've actually created an app, so I'm not remembering the exact details, but I think that it cuts out a lot of this extra stuff for you. So like the integration section, this is obviously completely gone. The CA file is still there, but it typically doesn't add all these extra notes to tell you exactly how you should be using that. So that's typically gone. Um, in uh, in the app host, it actually does not have the log level. By default, it uses info. But if you want to get debug log files, you could just add log file equals debug, or not log file, but log level equals debug, and that will actually give you the ability to switch that from info over to debug. So typically, this is kind of what you're going to see in an app, and that's just the basic stuff that you need. Is all that this is showing.
Makes sense. And the last question I have is going with the certificate there. Um, how do we obtain that if we wanted to essentially um, encrypt those communications?
So I believe when you actually install the app, it typically will grab the CA file for you and drop it in there and actually define this. But if you're trying to build it out yourself, the command is actually right here in the details. You can use OpenSSL to reach out to your resilient instance and grab the cert and then output that cert into a file.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay, so it's simpler than I thought. All right, cool.
yep.
Thanks.
So that's all there for you in the information, and that's why a lot of this information isn't shown within the file itself or within the app file itself, because a lot of the stuff the user's not going to need to know. All right. So now we have installed the virtual environment. We have activated the virtual environment. We have uh, added the correct Python modules that we needed to interact with the API, and we have built out the authorization for the app config authorization file for connecting to the API. So now the next step is actually going to be to access the API itself. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to there's two methods of authenticating to resilience. The method one is actually to parse out that that config file that we just did, which is the preferred way and is the way that I will be showing you today. And then there's another option that I've got in the notes for you if you want to play around with it. But that is to actually build out a simple client where you're defining the org name, the URL, and you are defining the username and password. Now that username and password, I don't know if you can pass API credentials through that. Um, Typically, I always used that in the early days when they didn't have API credentials. They only had an email address and password. So that's the way that I used to do it. Like I said, I haven't done that way in a long time. I always use the app config at this point. So play with that if you want to, but today I'll be showing you method one, which is we are going to drop into the Python, and then we're going to import resilient. Now that we've got resilient installed, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create the parser of the config file that we wanted. So we'll do parser equals resilience arguments parser, and then we're going to define the config file in here. Oops. And we're going to define that with resilience dot get config file. So because we already defined where the config file was actually located, which was when we went in and defined what the that OS environment variable was going to be, it's going to know exactly where to grab that config file. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and start parsing that out and get the information that we need. So we'll define that there. From there, we need to actually grab the options from the file itself. So we'll do just need to do that. And that will actually pull out the information that we define, such as the organization name, the port number we're going to use, the server name that we're going to be hitting, and the credentials that we're going to be using, as well as if we need to verify the cert and stuff like that. So now that we've got the options figured out here, what we're going to do is we're going to actually build the client. Oops, oh, guess I should finish that command first. But now what we're going to do is we're going to actually build the client that we're going to use to connect to SOAR here. So we're going to get the client function in there, and we're going to add ops. And this will allow us to, this will take those options that we got, it'll pass them to that client and actually build out our client, which we will use to connect to the API. So we'll go ahead and do that. It's going to give me a warning here letting me know that it's not verifying the SSL because I said CA file equals false. That. All right. So at this point, we have the client that we can use to connect to the API and actually start messing around with the API, pulling information back, stuff like that. So at this point, one of the things that we're going to do is we can use clients to do things like I'm going to do a GET request, right? So, and then we're going to add the URI in here, and we'll close that off. So whatever that URI is, we're going to put it in here, and I'll touch on that here in just a minute. But we've got, for client, we will have things like GET, which is easy. It's a GET command, right? We've got put. So you'll provide the URI and then provide a payload dictionary of whatever you're putting up there. And then we've got post, which is very similar to put, but we've got post is typically used when you're adding something new. Put is usually used when you are updating something, right? We also have a delete, which is more like the get, except for you're removing whatever you're pointing at there. And then the last one, which is the fun one, is the get put. Now, the way that this works is you provide it with that URI, then you're going to provide it with some kind of function. What this is you would build a function. So one of the things that you do within SOAR is if you are going to pull information down, update that information, and then put it back into it. You don't just pull down like one field and then update that field. you actually have to pull down the entire incident into a JSON dictionary and then convert it to a dictionary itself. And then you update that information, and then you have to put that entire incident back up there to update that. Well, the concern is depending on how long your code is, you could have a problem where you try to update something, you pull it down, you do a bunch of stuff to the code, and then when you're ready to put it back up, you go to put it back up, but somebody else updated it in that short amount of time. Now, with git put, what it does is you define a function. So it's just going to be running that function, to just updating whatever information you're telling it to in that function. And so it's going to pull down that information, update that with whatever the function is, and then automatically put it back up for you. So it takes a split second for you to use that script to pull something down, update it, and put it back up. So it's a pretty cool function. That's one of my favorites to use, especially when I'm trying to update incidents. All right, so what we're going to do here is the next step is interacting with the API. And now that we've got the client built, we can actually interact with the API. But if you don't understand the API or you're trying to understand the API, I really don't recommend you just using the clients to try to do stuff. What I recommend is we're going to be back into SOAR here. If you go over to the right side and then you go down to the help and contact, there's two tools down here that you can use for the REST API. There's the basic REST API reference sheet, which is just going to show you the different things you can do. And then you can click on this and get additional information, however you want to do this. But it's just providing you the information, right? The other option is you can actually use the interactive REST API, which does the same thing. It's going to give you everything that the other one showed you, which is just the details. But at the same time, what you can do is say I want to pull down something about the incident. So I can click on REST incident, and then I can actually open one of these things. And let's see here. So say we want to get the information from this incident. We're just going to grab this single incident. So we're going to come down here and we're going to have the option of entering an incident ID, which I think is 2096. Let me check that real quick. 2096. The org ID is already going to be filled out for you. And then what you can do is there'll be a bunch of different information here you can enter in if you want to format things differently or whatever. Now, the one thing I do highly recommend is the handle format. If you go here to the handle format object, you can actually see that there are a couple different ways we can format this. By default, it comes out as IDs. What this means is that when you are pulling the information down, it is in numerical code of what the field is. So your field has a name, but it also has a code related to it. So the computer is typically just going to be reading the code because it doesn't care. As long as it's got a value that it can relate to something else, that's all that it cares about. But as humans, we like to see things in something that we actually can read and understand. So what we would like is we want to see it in names. So what we're going to do is over here in the handle format, we're going to define that we want this as names. That way we get human readable text back so we know what field we're looking at because we can see the name, we don't see the ID itself. And then after you enter that information, you can actually come down here and test your code by hitting execute, and it will show you the response. Now, say I want this exact same thing, but I want to use it in the client that we just built. So it provides you with this URL request right here, which is not the entire thing, and I'll touch on that in just a second. But you've got the server name or the IP address for this instance, and you've got the org name. But you actually don't need to provide this stuff because this was actually already defined in the that config file that we provided it. So that's how it knew where to connect. So when I say URI and you need to provide a URI, what I'm actually saying is you need to provide everything after the org name here. So for this case, it would be incidents and then 2096. So we'll go ahead and copy this over. We'll jump into here. And first, paste that in there. I'm going to get rid of the rest of this because I'm just going to put this into a Git instead. But this is not the only thing that we need to enter. What we want to enter, or what we want to see, is we want to see the handle names. So what we're actually going to add here is we're going to add an and then handle names equals names, I think. Take a look at that again. What's that? Handle format, sorry. So handle format equals names. So now when we execute this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get an error. That's not what I wanted. Incidents. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. I think this is supposed to be a question mark, not an and. I think if you're adding additional information onto the end, then it would be ands, but yep, there we go. All right, so it's a question mark instead, so I apologize on that. But you would enter that, you would enter the question mark, and then after the question mark is where you're going to enter your additional information in the URL request. So in this case, we would enter the handle formats equals names. Then if you were going to add anything else to the end of this, you would go ahead and enter an and then whatever the next thing you wanted to add to that is. And obviously those things being, you know, this information here that's part of the header, it looks like. So that is essentially how you would test this, so you can, you know, figure out exactly what that code is going to be in here, and get your output so that you can start playing around with it. And then once you know exactly how you want things to work from playing around within the interactive API, then you just come over here and you can duplicate that over here. So for instance, if I wanted to do this, I could just call this incident. And now that incident is part of my variable here. So now another thing that I will touch on here as we wrap it up for the day is whenever you are working with an incident at this point and you've already pulled the information down, the information for the incident is the exact same as it is within SOAR. So what I mean by that is if I go into an incident here, or if I go into my customizations, and I go to my layout, when I'm looking at the fields that I have here, if I look at something like the created by field, right? Created by field is something that is in the system by default. The API name is creator ID. So if I was looking in this incident and I wanted to look for the creator ID, I would just be able to do creator ID. That's going to give me that variable. However, if I want a field that I added, so for instance, let's see if I can find something that I added here. I don't know if I've added a field here. So let's go ahead and add a field here. And we'll do, say we create this incident field here. This is a test. And go ahead and save that out there. And now what we'll do is I'll pull this down one more time. So it's got that information in it. Now what we're going to do is if I go to this and I try to type in this is a test, It's going to come back and it's not going to provide me with anything because that doesn't exist. All custom fields are actually built into the properties variable. So there you can actually see that there is my variable. And what I can do from here is I can just do another string command here and do get this is a test. That is essentially how you would start getting used to working with the API itself. And I hope you guys got good information out of this, but we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here.